Welcome into our Week 5 matchup in the VRL between the Pittsburgh Scizors and the Vancouver Ursarings. Pittsburgh coming in with Charizard, Scizor, Garchomp, Whimsicott, Tyranitar, and Glamora. Vancouver coming in with the usual team of Snorlax, Machamp, Politoed, Gardevoir, Dragonite, and Absol. A new waiver was added to the league, which allowed teams to replace up to 6 Pokemon for the remainder of the season. We are underway here in Week 5. Pittsburgh coming in with 35 points, sitting at a 3-1 record, facing their first loss in the league. Vancouver coming in on a bit of a losing streak and only picking up 1 point last week against Los Angeles, so sitting at 16 points and sitting at a 1-3 record. So, who will stand out here as we begin Week 5 of the Victory Road League? Pittsburgh leading out with their Scizor and Whimsicott, and the Vancouver Ursarings leading off with their Garchomp and Snorlax, or excuse me, not Garchomp, Gardevoir, excuse me. What do these two coaches and teams decide to do here is the question. Vancouver gonna withdraw that Gardevoir right away and gonna send out their Dragonite. Whimsicott going for a fake tears here, which will lower Snorlax's special defense by 2, if I'm not mistaken, and a bullet punch coming on to the Dragonite from the Scizor, and that life orb is kicking in now for that Scizor, which will take a 10 of its health every turn. A yawn coming from the Snorlax onto the Scizor from Vancouver's side. We had no 3 game sets in Week 4 last week, so hopefully we change that this week with a great 6-game slate. Tyranitar coming out. That Sandstream is going to kick in here. Whimsicott with a Moonblast onto the Dragonite, and it is a good KO. So the first points belong to Pittsburgh here. Both teams looking to bounce back from losses. Body Slam coming out for the Snorlax onto the Whimsicott, and it's good to paralyze. And of course, the Sandstorm will buffer the Whimsicott and Snorlax here. And they're going to send out their Machamp. So, for Vancouver side, we now know that they have Snorlax, Machamp, and Gardevoir remaining now that their Dragonite is knocked out. Of course, Pittsburgh, we're still waiting to see that 4th Mon that they decided to bring this week. Of course, they had to change some things up after finally losing and using the same team that they had used for the same straight 3 weeks. That 4th week last week against Toronto, they weren't able to navigate. And that 4th Pokemon for Pittsburgh is going to be the Glamora. Whimsicott using a Tailwind here. Champ coming in for a close combat onto the Glamora, knocks it down to 16% of health. That defense and special defense is going to drop by 1, and the toxic spikes are coming out due to that ability. Body Slam coming back out, and it's gonna knock out the Whimsicott. So a point to Vancouver. So getting a point early on here compared to last week, and that Sandstorm is going to continue to buffer. So a early point here for Vancouver compared to their week against Los Angeles, which is pretty damn huge here. Pretty much a neck and neck matchup here. Scizor going to come back out for the Pittsburgh Scizors. Of course, their matchup is great. Vancouver looking to get a win here as they head into the bye week. Pittsburgh, of course, will play the Denver Gigaliths next week in Week 6. How do those two teams approach that going into next week? Who is going to pick up a win and who is walking out of here with a loss? Glamora with a spiky shield up now. It's going to protect itself there. Scizor going for a close combat onto the Snorlax. It is good to knock it out. Pittsburgh with another point here. And that defense and special defense is going to drop for the Scizor by 1. That life orb going to kick in some more. Machamp coming out, going for a close combat onto the Scizor, and it is good. We are neck and neck here, folks. But to something to keep in mind for these Pokemon that are coming out for Vancouver, they're gonna have to deal with the toxic spikes that are on, so that poison damage is going to tick up. In addition, the Tyranitar coming back out, so we are down to Tyranitar and Glimmora for Pittsburgh side, and down to Machamp and Gardevoir for the Vancouver Ursarings. Of course, this Gardevoir known to Mega Evolve, Tyranitar known to Mega Evolve, and Gardevoir now with that poison effect. How does Vancouver navigate that as they try to steal this match 1 win? It's been a neck and neck race between these two teams here through the first set. There is that Tyranitar coming out for Pittsburgh's behalf. And the Gardevoir will also come out for Vancouver's behalf. So we have a Mega versus Mega showdown here. Gardevoir going for a Vacuum Wave onto the Tyranitar, knocks it down to 61% of its health. Glimmora going for an Earth Power onto the Machamp, knocks it down to 24% of its health. Machamp, though, going to kick in that Citrus Berry, picking it back up to almost half of its health. And Knockoff coming onto the Gardevoir, knocking it down to 41%. Rock Slide coming out. Glimmora is down. Vancouver is 1 Pokemon away from getting the match win here. All that remains is this Tyranitar. Of course, that poison going to kick in. Gardevoir down to 23%. Machamp down to 43%. Tyranitar with 45%. It is going to be close here. Very, very close. Can Pittsburgh somehow close this out? Of course, they still have Tailwind. They still have Sandstorm on their side for this turn. And a Toxic Spikes of +2 is on the board here. Vancouver, you feel like, has to get a win here. They've played okay up until that Los Angeles loss, but there's still more to be expected from the Vancouver Ursarings. Tyranitar coming out with a Protect here. Gardevoir was going to go for the Moonblast, will not hit. Machamp going for that close combat, also will not hit. A smart move. The Sandstorm luckily will subside, but Gardevoir down to 11%. The Tailwind will peter out. What is going to happen here on this turn? Of course, if Pittsburgh decides to Protect again, there's a 30% chance that it actually works. Tyranitar going out with a Rock Slide will be good enough to knock out the Gardevoir here. So it comes down to this Machamp. And the Machamp is going to flinch, and he cannot move. All that stands between these two trainers and these two teams. And there it is, a knockoff. Pittsburgh gets the match win. And here in our best of 3, a close call indeed. Welcome back into our Week 5 matchup between the Pittsburgh Scizors and the Vancouver Ursarings. It has been a heavyweight matchup. Both teams deciding to bring the same teams from their first set here in our best of 3. Pittsburgh able to pick up 5 points, getting that last kill on to the Machamp, and their Tyranitar surviving. Vancouver was super close. Can they pull themselves out of this and get to a third match set? Or will Pittsburgh be reclaiming a win here in Week 5? Politoed and Gardevoir coming out for the Vancouver Ursarings. Charizard and Garchomp for Pittsburgh side. Gardevoir able to trace a Garchomp's Rough Skin ability. Vancouver, like I said, in that first match, able to get it close down to just that Tyranitar, but unfortunately, due to being slower, they weren't able to get it off. And of course, that toxic debris from the Glimmora was able to poison this Gardevoir that's on the field. What do these two trainers decide to do? And there's the Charizard Y coming out for Pittsburgh's behalf. So we will not see a Mega Tyranitar this time. But that drought is going to kick in. Of course, an interesting choice that Politoed doesn't have Drizzle. Gardevoir coming also out for a Mega Evolution. So we've got 2 early Megas here compared to our last set. Charizard going for a Weather Ball, going straight for that Gardevoir, knocks it down to 11% of its health. Garchomp going for a Stomping Tantrum, and it is good enough to knock out the Gardevoir. So another point to Pittsburgh. Politoed going for a Hydro Pump, will hit the Charizard, will knock it down only to 45% due to that drought being up. So a big play by Pittsburgh here to knock out that Gardevoir pretty early. What does Vancouver decide to do? They decide to bring out their Absol here in this type of situation. Of course, now we have a Harsh Sunlight up for 4 more turns. Solar Beam coming out for the Pittsburgh Scizors, going for that Politoed. And it is a 1-hit KO. Another point to Pittsburgh here. Dragon Claw coming out will knock the Absol down to 33%. Knockoff coming on to the Garchomp. Of course, that Rough Skin's going to kick in, knocking it down to 20%, but was able to get Garchomp down below 50% of its health. It is down to the Snorlax and Absol duo here in this second match. Of course, all we have seen from Pittsburgh here is the Charizard Garchomp duo. Charizard coming out with a Heat Wave, good enough to knock out the Absol. Garchomp going for a Rock Slide, knocks Snorlax down to 55% of its health. And the Snorlax is going to flinch and can't move. A tough luck and a great break for the Pittsburgh Scizors. Tough on Vancouver's end. Charizard going for that Weather Ball, boosted by that drought. Knocks Snorlax down to 31%. Garchomp with a Dragon Claw. And that is it, folks. It is a clean 2-0 sweep. And we will see if Pittsburgh will do a post-game interview.